Hi, this is Kannababu. This is part 2 of WCF. In this video, we will discuss about architecture of SOA, service-oriented architecture. So here, web services, WCF, this all comes under what? Service-oriented architecture. First of all, you must know the architecture of SOA. So actually, in architecture of SOA, basically, we must know about three things. One is service provider, other one is service consumer, another one is service registry. Now let us see one example, you will understand. So here, as I already told you that the main advantage of this service-oriented applications are nothing but what? Creating the communication between different applications that was developed in different languages or different technologies. Here, let us assume that we are developing bookmyshow.com. Bookmyshow.com is developed by using ASP.NET. Let us assume that. And here we are having one more application called ICICIbank.com. So ICICIbank.com is developed by using what? Java. Now this application must interact with this application. Now creating the communication between different applications that was developed in different languages or different technologies. And here this type of applications are called as heterogeneous applications, as we already discussed. Now here ICICI Bank is service provider. Service provider means who will provide the service. Service consumer means who will consume the service. So a web service or WCF service will become as what? Service provider. And service consumer is nothing but it is a web application like bookmyshow.com, ebay.com, amazon.com, flipkart.com. These all are what? Service consumers. Is it these all must consume the service that is provided by this banking application. So what is a service? Service is nothing but it is a simple class. It is a simple class which consists of what? Some methods. Let us assume that first of all, so service provider what he will do, he will create a service. Service provider will create one service. Service means he will create a class. In that class there are some methods are there. For example, let us assume that here one class is there. The name of the class is ICICI service. And in this class there is one method is there, something like public void do transaction, passing the parameters account number, CVV number, date, expiry date, account number, all these things. There are some parameters that we are trying to pass for this method. So what service provider will do? Service provider will create the service. And this service can be created in any language or any technology. It may be either in Java or .NET or PHP, whatever it may be. And this service was given to service consumer. Are you following? Service consumer, because for example through bookmyshow.com, if I want to do any transaction through ICICI Bank, definitely I must have the link with what? ICICI Bank. So what this banking people will do, they will create one service and we need to buy that particular service and we have to consume the service in our web application. So the developer who will create the service is called as service provider. The developer who will consume the service is called as service consumer. So where the person who will create the service and consume the service, both are what? Developers. So here, first of all, what will happen? Service provider will create a service. Service means simple class. In that class, they will declare some method. In that method, some code is there. And whatever the methods and properties or whatever the information that you declare inside the class, what service provider will do? Service provider will create one documentation. The documentation name is WSDL, Web Service Description Language. What information that he will maintain in this particular documentation? This documentation consists of the entire information of the service, like a service URL. The first he will create the service, and after creating the service means a simple class, as I told, he will keep this service on the server. And where the service is located, that service URL, and what is the class name, service names, method names, input parameters, return types, the entire information of this particular service is documented in one document. The name of the document is WSDL. You can simply call as WSDL, Web Service Description Language. Is it clear? So what I told until now, for step number 1, service provider will create the service. Step number 2, service provider will host the service on the server. Step number 3, service provider will prepare one document. The name of the document is WSDL file. This WSGL means Web Service Description Language. This WSGL is developed in which language? XML. Is it clear? So, what does the WSGL file consist of? It consists of the entire information of the service, like the service URL, class names, method names, input parameters. The entire information will be documented in a document which is called as WSGL. And later, this WSGL file is kept in a common place where everyone can access, which is called as service registry. So, what is service registry? Service registry is a server which is used to hold all the WSGL files. The service registry is UDDI, Universal Discovery Description Integration. UDDI is a server which is used to hold all the WSGL files. Will you follow? So, what service provider will do? Service provider will place this WSGL file in UDDI. UDDI is also called as XML registry. Are you following? Now, what service consumer will do? Service consumer will send the request to the service provider. Then service provider will send whenever the WSGL file is registered under service registry, this UDDI will give the WSGL URL to service provider. WSGL URL to service provider. Now, here you say service consumer will send the request to service provider. Service provider will send the WSGL URL to service consumer. Now, service consumer will connect to UDDI and using this WSGL URL and download the WSGL file. Download the WSGL file. Now, once when he downloads the WSGL file, service consumer must know how to read the WSGL file, because the entire information of the service is available in the WSGL file. Service consumer, the developer who is consuming the service, must have the good knowledge on how to read the WSGL file. Like he must know what is the service URL, class names, method names, input parameters, return type. He must be able to identify the information in WSGL file. In order to identify that one, he must have the knowledge on what? XML. So, service consumer first he will identify what? The service URL. And the service consumer will connect to the service through service URL by using a protocol called HTTP. Here HTTP is called as communication protocol. It is used to create the communication between service consumer and server, that is service provider. Is it clear? So it is called as a protocol which is used to create the communication. And here the information between service consumer and the server will be through what? Here service consumer means what? Web application. Server means in server what is located? Your web service is located or your WSF service is located. Now these two must interact with what? Each other. And the communication is done through what? HTTP, and the message will transfer in the form of what? SOAP. Here SOAP is called as Simple Object Access Protocol. HTTP is called as Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is called as Communication Protocol. SOAP is called as Message Transfer Protocol. SOAP is developed based on what? XML. WSGL file is developed based on what? XML. UDDI is developed based on what? XML. It is called as an XML registry. So, whenever you want to work with what? The service-oriented architecture like web service or WSF, definitely you must have the knowledge on XML. So, here what I am telling again, I am repeating, you see. Service provider will create the service and he will place the service on the server. Service provider will create one document, WSGL file. This document consists of the entire information of the service. And later he will register this document in UDDI. UDDI is a XML registry which consists of only WSGL file. UDDI is used to advertise the WSGL file. And whenever he registers the WSGL file in service registry will send the WSGL URL to service provider. Now service consumer will send the request to whom? Service provider to consume the service. Then service provider will send the WSGL URL to the service consumer. And service consumer means web application. The developer who wants to consume the service, he must have the knowledge on what? WSGL file. He must know how to read the WSGL file. and this WSUL file consists of some information like service URL, class name, method name, this is all the information. With this information, we will connect to the server by using service URL. Here the communication between service consumer and service provider server is due to HTTP. And here the message transfer is due to SOAP. So SOAP is a simple object access protocol. SOAP is like SOAP will not transfer the data. SOAP consists of actually data, and this data was given to HTTP. So SOAP over HTTP. For example, what is the use of SOAP, sir? We'll discuss anyway. But here you see, service consumer will send the request to what? Server to consume the service. And this request is, which request is in MSIL code. And this MSIL code cannot understand by whom? Server. For example, here in this server side, the service is developed by using what? Java. JVM cannot understand MSIL code. So again what we will do? We cannot transfer object via what? Network. That is the reason we will convert this MSIL code into what? SOAP. And this SOAP was given to what? HTTP. And HTTP will take this SOAP to service provider. And then it will try to what? Consume the service. What are you following? So here the communication between service provider and service consumer is due to what? HTTP. The message transfer is due to what? SOAP. So I am calling SOAP as a message transfer protocol. HTTP is called as what? Communication protocol. Are you following? SOAP consists of actually data. The request object and the response object. The data, actual data will be stored in where? SOAP, and this SOAP was given to what? HTTP. So here a small concept is there. What is that one? Whatever the request we are sending, that request is object and the response is also object. We cannot send object via what? Network. So here what we have to do, we have to convert the object into stream of bytes. That concept is called as serialization. So this stream of bytes is nothing but what? SOAP. Is it clear? And actually whatever the request object we are sending, that request object is converted to SOAP. And this SOAP was given to what? HTTP. HTTP is like what? For example, if you consider a loading truck. Loading truck means the truck is moving. In the truck what is there? Load is there. And the load is moving, a truck is moving. Here actually truck is moving. Load is not. Load is, the truck is taking the load along with them. So here HTTP is communication protocol. It will take the request object to the server and it will bring the response object to the server. And this request object is in the form of what? SOAP, because we cannot directly send object via what? Network. So definitely here you must have the knowledge on serialization and what? Deserialization. Serialization means it is a process of converting object into stream of bytes, and deserialization means it is a process of converting stream of bytes into object. Anyway, we will discuss the architecture of what? SOAP and everything in the next session. I hope you understood. So your final points are: service provider will create the service and service provider will host the service on the server. Service provider will create WSGL file. WSGL is Web Service Description Language. WSGL file is a document which was developed by using XML, which is used to describe the web service, that is service information like service URL, class names, method names, input parameters, etc. And then service provider will register the WSGL file in UDDA. UDDA full form is Universal Description, Discovery and Integration. UDDA is a platform independent XML based registry where all the WSGL files are available. UDDA is also developed based on W3 standards. And UDDA is a platform independent XML based registry where all the WSGL files are available. So here UDDA is used to advertise the WSGL file. UDDA is a server. Whenever service provider will register WSGL file in UDDA, then UDDA will give the WSGL URL to service provider. Then service consumer will send the request to service provider. Then service provider will send WSGL URL to service consumer. Then service consumer must know how to read the WSGL file, and he will try to check the service URL, and he will try to interact with server by using HTTP protocol, and the message transfer is by using SOAP. So this is about the architecture of what? SOA. In the next video, we will discuss some other concepts. Thank you. Have a nice day.